warm welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we've a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. Aistear, the Early Childhood Curriculum Framework, was initially launched in 2009. So much has changed in Ireland and in the early years sector in that period. The CCE scheme has been introduced. Educators and setters are all qualified now, and increasingly many are qualified to level 8 and more. We have First 5, the whole of government strategy that's being implemented. We've the whole access and inclusion model. Ireland is more diverse than it ever was, and we're increasingly aware of issues around sustainability, and research developments are increasing every year. So to reflect all these changes and more, I've only named a few there, Aistear is being updated. So to take us through the consultation and development process so far and to talk about some of the next steps, I'm so pleased to be joined by Dr. Sharon Skehill from NCCA. Sharon works as an education officer in the NCCA, the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, on the early childhood and primary team. She's working on updating Aistear, the early childhood curriculum framework. She has extensive experience working as an early years educator with babies, toddlers and young children, with a particular focus on the outdoors. And she has also worked as a lecturer and researcher in early years education. Sharon, you're really welcome. It's great to chat to you.
Thank you, Maura. I'm delighted to be with you this morning.
And I'm really looking forward to hearing all about the updating Aistear process. So I've outlined some of the rationale for the updating of Aistear there, but maybe, can you flesh that out a little bit more for us? Aistear is very well regarded, very relevant to young children. So, why is it being updated, and why is it being updated now?
Well, Maura, I suppose the most things, as you have pointed out yourself, so much has happened in the past 14 years since Aistear was introduced to the sector. So I think first and foremost, as you were saying, it's an update. We do not want to, it's not about replacing anything. So everything that we know about Aistear still stands, so everything that we know about that child-centered approach, and that's all still there. So the update is really about making sure that we're reflecting, how Irish society has changed, about how our communities have changed, and being very aware as well of how the sector has changed. So when you look back at 2009, in terms of the qualifications of the staff, of how we've progressed as a sector, and that there's so many competent and skilled educators who are engaging with Aistear. So it was really to make sure that we are keeping up to date with things. So there's a lot of big changes that have happened, especially around, as you mentioned, in terms of sustainability, in terms of children's rights, and we're just a lot more informed about these things. So while the original Aistear had a lot of those things already kind of implied or embedded, it was really about drawing out that more explicitly in the update to make sure that it continues to be very relevant in today's society.
So Sharon, can you take us through then what has happened so far? This is a next step in itself. There's been some consultation already. This is a step on the road to the final updated Aistear, isn't it?
Yes, so there's a wonderful long journey to update Aistear. That this doesn't just happen that we sit at a desk and decide that we're going to change something. So there's been a really intensive consultation process. So phase 1 has already happened. So in phase 1, it began, we have, first of all, there was a literature review carried out by a team of researchers from DCU, from Dublin City University. And that was about looking at a whole range of different studies from the Irish context and also internationally, looking at early childhood learning and development And that focused very exclusively on the themes of Aistear. So well-being, identity and belonging, communicating and exploring and thinking. And that's available on the NCCA website for anybody who'd like to read it. And then alongside that, then the phase one consultation involved engaging with educators, with any stakeholders who were involved in early childhood, about asking them, very essentially, there was two core questions in phase one: what is working well with Aistear and what needs to be changed or updated. So we got a lot of rich data from that, but also alongside those two methods, there was also the consultation with babies, toddlers, and young children. And that was research that was carried out by Maynooth University, Early Childhood Ireland yourselves, and Stranmillis as well. And that was a real innovative piece of research to consider what is working well with Aistear and to really try and get that child's perspective. And often people ask, well, how do you get the perspective of babies and toddlers and young children? And sometimes when we think about the voice of the child, and we've spoken about this more of when does that start? Often people think, well, when they're 7 and they can go on the student council, but really this report, the research that was carried out by that consortium kind of looked at the voice of babies and toddlers and young children, see what's their experience of Aistear. And you do that like that. It's through, I suppose, what educators are doing every day, in quality practice, that you're watching, you're noticing, you're observing, and to see what is working well, what are the things that matter for babies and toddlers and young children in practice. So that was a really rich piece of research in phase one that told us an awful lot about that child perspective that was interpreted then by the educators and the researchers. All of the findings then from, say, the questionnaires and written submissions and focus groups that was carried out during phase one consultation, combined with the literature review and the Maynooth and ECI and Stranmillis research, they were all kind of compiled and analysed, and that's what has developed this draft, the proposed draft one, that is now available on the website. So now we're in phase two. So we have kind of developed the update, the proposed update, as a result of all of this data. So now we're coming out again to say, what do you think about this? Now, another important thing, I suppose, to illustrate in that consultation process is internally that we've had these development groups as well, as part of our consultation, to make sure that with each stage and with each part of Aistear, as we talked about the principles and the themes, that we're coming back to development groups who, again, this core group of people who are working in practice, who are working in third level, who are working in policy and in research, that they're helping us as well to kind of reflect on the information that we have and think about how we, put that into an update that is relevant and meaningful for the sector. So that's what the phase two, that piece of the document that's available on the website now for phase two consultation.
And in that update, Sharon, can you take us through what some of those kind of key messages, the key changes that are in the current draft that's available for consultation on the NCCA website at the moment? When members of Early Childhood Ireland go into the website and look at the updated Aistear, can you kind of summarise what they'll see?
Yes, so there's, again, it's an update. So the structure is pretty much the same as it has been. But first off, I suppose starting off, it's about that view of the baby, toddler and young child. And you'll notice, even as I'm talking, I talk about baby, toddler and young child. And we've used that in the updated Aistear. And again, that was there in the original, but we didn't explicitly name them. So it's really about giving that importance to every stage of children's development. So that view and that image of the child as agentic, competent and confident. So it's really kind of strengthening that. what we have included there as well in that initial vision for Aistear is the view of the educator as well. So that's something that's new and included as presenting the educator as competent, confident, agentic, and reflective. And again, it's not to like previously it was now the role of the adult. So the way we're presenting educator is whoever is engaging with the framework to support children's learning and development. And I think what's important is to acknowledge that the flexibility of Aistear is still there. So people come to it with a different lens. So, for somebody, maybe a student who's starting out engaging with Aistear, they might take it at a different, have different interpretations than what somebody who may be working for years in the sector and is quite used to it. But the idea is that somebody who is coming to it, they have those different interpretations and that flexibility is there. So the educator is somebody who is coming with intent to the framework. So the structure of Aistear has been updated. I suppose it's about, one of the important things was giving more visibility to the principals. And I think for all of us who have worked with Aistear and love Aistear, but the principles sometimes got lost at the beginning and people kind of went directly to the themes. And whereas really the principles have to be foundational, they really have to be able to, I suppose, be the basis of all children's learning and development is those principles. So those have been updated. We've also retained the themes, so they're the same. But what we've tried to do is kind of interweave the principles through that. So when you're talking about learning environments, when you're talking about agentic citizens, or it's to see that you would see them down through the themes as well, so they're continually relevant and informing people's practice. So again, we are retaining the guidelines for good practice, but what we have presented in the updated, the proposed update, there's guidance there. So there's guidance at the end that kind of acknowledging the kind of the new concepts or new ideas that have been introduced. So things like sustainability or slow relational pedagogy, and giving a springboard to updated guidelines as well. So for us to be able to engage with them. Again, it's about drawing more attention to the very important things that came from the consultation. And one of the really strong messages was the importance of interactions and relationships. And that came across the data about the importance of that slow relational pedagogy. And I know, again, that's something that you have done a lot of work around in Early Childhood Ireland.
Absolutely.
But that importance of the relationships, and again, the importance of the key person approach and how that makes such a difference for children. So to making sure that that's really embedded. And I think what's nice is to be able to value, that slowing down and being with babies and toddlers and young children, and the value of that in itself. What's also there is about fostering enhanced connections with friends, with communities, and with neighbourhoods. And that was something lovely that came up in the consultation with babies and toddlers and young children, was the importance of friendship, which was lovely. To see in baby rooms, they seek out their little friends, and it's really about valuing that and creating a space where that can happen. Like having babies and toddlers and young children, representing them as citizens with rights. So really enhancing that focus on their rights and about creating that space for them to be able to communicate their voice. So whether that is in the baby room, that it's through those gestures and those utterances, whether it's their bodily language, whether it's their moods, for us, again, coming back to the role of the educator in that way of being able to interpret and facilitate those voices, in whatever way they're communicated to us. So that's really kind of embedded throughout as well. The multimodality, as they say, of child voice. And what's also nice as well is acknowledging that competent child, to see their emerging responsibilities and to see, well, how can you nurture that from a very young age? So there's that's kind of interwoven as well to really see how we can support children to explore and find their place in the world, to live sustainably and care for themselves and for others and the environment.
You mentioned the principles. The principles, while they're still there and they're made more visible, maybe, and explicit, they have changed to bring in their, concepts like the slow relational pedagogy and so on.
Yes, so the principles, what you remember with the original one, you remember that there was the 12 principles and they were grouped. So we changed that. I think people, again, it was from the feedback that there was a little bit of repetition in the principles as well. So we've tried to, I suppose, draw them together a bit more. So now we have the first one is agentic global citizens. So about giving agency, about acknowledging that children have that right and that ability to take lead in their own learning and development. Then it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's just changing that word of equality to equity. And again, it's coming from our learning and aligning with policy, along the access and inclusion model and the DEI guidance. The next one is the relationships and interactions are there. We're looking at family and community. Again, acknowledging the diversity of that. It might necessarily just always be parents, that the family kind of pulls in a broader understanding of that. Agentic educators, rather than the role of the adult. So we've called agentic educators, again, giving an nod to that, how they can interpret the framework. A new principle on transitions has been included. And I think that's very important. And also drawing attention to the fact that it's not just from preschool to primary school, but it's about those transitions coming in and out of the setting, between the daily routines and between rooms within the setting. So trying to establish a broader understanding of transitions. Holistic learning and development is still there. Play and hands-on experiences and learning environments. So those are the 4 principles that are that have kind of been updated. So nothing has been removed, but it's more that they've kind of been pulled together to make it, I suppose, that there's an easier flow throughout the framework.
And kind of regrouped, and some of the emphasis being changed and so on.
Absolutely. I think, especially when you think about concepts like diversity, equity, and inclusion, that was one that we really wanted to get right, to make sure, because again, as we know, like our society has changed so much since 2009, and to have that awareness of diversity, of people, of culture, of languages in our community. So it's really important that people can see themselves reflected, the children, babies and toddlers can see themselves reflected in the framework. So it was, broadening that out a bit. And also what I think was lovely is while we look at how we respect and celebrate diversity, but also about valuing, that connectedness. And I think that was important as well, to say that of the similarities that are there, and that bringing together. One of the things that we looked at that we've introduced is new as well. And again, while Aistear has always talked about Irish culture as being important, but what we've tried to do is put a little bit more focus on it. We've looking at the language and linguistic history and story as well. So we've included some words and phrases on Skehill in Irish. So that's an interesting one now when we come out to consultation to hear people's thoughts on that. But I suppose from our perspective, it was kind of thinking about, that we have so many people who are, who are new to the Irish language, and maybe just, the couple of words helps build that little bit of a connection with this and a sense of place as well. So it might be something nice for people to be able to give feedback on that as well, of what they think about that. And there's the Seanokul as well in the guidance. So there's some nice ones of how that it kind of illustrates with the Irish language, how sometimes it can't be literally translated, but there's lovely words and lovely meanings behind them. So yeah, that was an interesting one.
Giving that visibility. And the themes then have remained the same. The same 4 themes, but some of the learning goals have been kind of reworked and rejigged. Isn't that right?
Yes, they've actually been halved. So, which I'm sure a lot of people, that's what we've proposed. Yeah. And I suppose another important thing is that we took the numbers away as well. Because often what you might have found is that like people thinking that they have to nearly achieve certain aims and learning goals, whereas Aistear is very holistic and, one provocation or one experience could be linking in with so many different learning opportunities, and that if we're stuck on numbers, that you can lose that a little bit. So really, the themes, the learning goals have been halved, but they still are very broad and very observable, so they're broad statements so that they will work for babies, toddlers, and young children, different ages, different stages, and that again, it's about how you interpret that and how you can see the value of those. And again, it's about emphasizing that learning through play and those hands-on experiences. And that's very much embedded, that there's the different opportunities. I think that with, rather than being very focused and stuck on things, being very specific that you have to achieve certain things, it really is about seeing where are the opportunities for learning about science and technology and literacy and numeracy and all like for STEM, for outdoors. Actually, what's nice, and you drew attention to that more. I'm a real advocate for the outdoors, but we have a new aim in there about outdoors as well, and kind of learning through nature as well. So embed it in that, and again that links in with so much that you can learn in terms of, science in the outdoors, engineering, an awful lot to be learned again around sustainability and creating that connection with the environment. And I think when we talk about environments, being aware as well that this needs to work. Aistear has to work in a large rural setting, an outdoor setting, and it also has to work in inner city centre setting. So it's about that flexibility as well, and seeing what opportunities there are for engaging in.
The context is so important.
It's so important. Yeah.
And I suppose that kind of takes me to the next area that I was going to cover, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I just wondered if you had kind of more specific bits to say about the role of the educator and that bit of contextualizing it. And you've mentioned about that aspect being anybody who's engaging with framework rather than the role of the adult that was there before. Do you want to expand on that a little bit, Sharon?
Yeah, and I think the principle as well on agentic educators, it really is acknowledging that educators are people who they support and facilitate learning, and through that lovely respectful regard for the children who they are with, like whether it's your own child at home, whether it's a childminder in the setting, but it's about the importance of that relationship and that knowing a child. And I think that's one of the really important things when we talk about slow relational pedagogy, is to know if you don't have that connection, if you don't understand the value of that or know the importance of that role that you have, when you're with a child, it doesn't matter how beautiful the environment is or how wonderful the learning goals are, it has to start with those relationships, and so much starts with those educators. So again, like I said, whether it is from the perspective of parents, childminder, or the educator at whatever level that you're at, but it's about that you're able to really, know about children's learning and development, and that I suppose that you have an informed, and we use the word intentional, but insofar as that you're guided by your knowledge and your skills. So your knowledge of the child, to know what they like, what you need to do to help them support their learning, what provocations might, support them in getting to know others in the group, to maybe settle more into the daily routines or whatever it is. But the agentic educators, all the research tells us that's the basis of quality care and education. It comes from the people, it comes from the educators. So that's really important, that I think that we acknowledge that, while also I think what's nice is that with Aistear, and it has always been, I suppose, so flexible as a framework, you can come to this with those different lenses, so you can come with your level 8 or level 9 and having a really strong grounding in child development and, different curricular approaches. But you can also equally have such a valuable, curriculum in your setting. I think like your daily routines, informed by how you value that child and what they like to do and how you can just support their learning. So a really important part as well of this phase 2 consultation is to tell us what would help educators, whether again, whatever form that you're taking, whatever your role is, up to engage with the framework. So that's something that's important for us in this second phase, is say what would be useful, or what do you want to know. Like we have some just a couple of very short resources added in as the appendix and the document on the website, about how to support sustainability. And again, just even some ideas around for people to know, well, how do I do sustainability in the baby room? Like, what does that look like? So it's to give people the tools that they need to engage with it. So again, in the different contexts, and that's very important, that we get the feedback from people in those different contexts, to say, well, what works? Like, do you need ideas for, people who are working, like as you said, in a city centre setting, about how are we going to engage with nature? So is that something that we need to do? So things like that, that for educators to be able to engage with the framework.
I think you make that point really well, that no matter how gorgeous an environment is, it's the people in it that make the difference.
Absolutely.
That those relationships and interactions, and knowing the child, knowing their interests, knowing their family, and valuing all of that. You make that point so well.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned a couple of times about the phase 2 consultation. So how can people engage with the consultation and have their express their opinions on the drafts that are there? What are the next steps?
So on the NCCA website that you will see, we have links to questionnaires. So there's online questionnaires. There's also the option to register for focus groups. There are some suggested times and dates in those the forms for the focus groups, but also there's a box there that you can say if none of those dates suit you, to let us know if you're interested. And we would, because really whoever wants to say something, we want to hear it. And that's really important, I think, to put that out there, because Aistear has been so well owned by the sector. Like we feel very proud of it, and internationally, it's a really good early years framework. So we want to make sure that the update is equally held in the same regard. So you can't do that unless you engage with the people who are going to be using it. There's also the option then for written submissions. So if you have more to say than what the questionnaire allows you, is to please feel free for individual or group submissions. So whether it's a session or whether you're part of an organisation, to be able to submit a written submission as well would be really important. So all of there's a report from the first consultation is available there, as well as that consultation with babies and toddlers and young children. And that's going into phase 2 as well, which is lovely that we're continuing to follow the educators there as co-researchers in saying, right, here is a proposed updated framework, and to consider, what they think will work well with that, and what else we need to consider in that regard. So we would love to hear from people to give us your feedback, because again, all of that data then is analysed, and that will be fed into producing hopefully a final draft next year.
Is there a deadline, Sharon? Is there a closing date?
So the closing date is 14th of November, so we've a while to go yet. So so there's plenty of time. And like I said, I think it's really important that, particularly for your members, for people working in practice, what works well, because you're there, you're with the children. And Aistear, it's like that's it. It's for the babies and toddlers and young children. So what's really important is that we have that voice of the educators and those who engage with Aistear, to give us the feedback and to say, whether you think we need more clarity, or we need to include more of this, or that's really valuable for us to be able to interpret that. And a key part of the consultation process. That's why there's a consultation.
Great, Sharon. There's so much in there to think about, and it's great that the consultation is taking so many forms, and that there is a phase 2 that people can see that the feedback they gave to phase 1 has been addressed and included, and so on, or if there's anything additional that people want to express their opinion on. We'll have links to the consultation in our weekly e-zine and on the podcast page. So Sharon, thanks for outlining all of that, and the thought and the processes by which the updated draft has been produced, and some of the changes. So thank you so much for all of that.
Not at all. Thanks to yourself, Maura.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Ericus Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.